So our presenters today are Erin Garrett. Erin is a University of Illinois Extension Energy and Environmental Stewardship educator. She covers Alexander, Johnson, Massac, Pulaski, and Union counties, which are in the southernmost part of Illinois. Our second presenter is Austin Little. Austin is a University of Illinois Extension horticulture educator, and he covers Jackson, Franklin, Williamson, Randolph, and Perry counties in southern Illinois as well. With that, I will let Erin and Austin take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Maggie, for the introduction, and thanks for hosting today. And we're happy to have Erin Garrett with us today as well. So today we've got on the schedule here, we've got a nice collection of plant species and specimens that have been sent in from attendees. Hopefully everybody that sent in photos is here to check them out today. But they're from all over the state, and even a few from southeast Missouri and around the St. Louis area. And so we're going to go through these and identify them and talk a little bit about each of these plants, a little bit about their habitats and care and these kind of things. They're sort of cultural kind of information. And so we'll each kind of talk about these plants. We'll kind of split them up. Erin is, I believe Erin's more of an expert on kind of natural native prairie type species that you might find out in the natural environment, whereas my background is a bit more, is a bit heavier in kind of landscape plants, but also native plants. So that's kind of, we'll try to split them up that way. And there's a few that are just kind of questions about different kinds of landscape installations or gardens, and we'll talk about those as well. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started here on our Summer Plant ID webinar. And thanks for joining us today. Oh, and as we said, we'll take questions at the end. So if you have any questions about what we're covering, we'll have plenty of time for a question and answer at the conclusion here.
All right, thank you, Austin, and good afternoon, everyone. This is Erin, and I'm going to get us started on our first plant today. So the first photo we had sent in was of this cactus here, and for those who didn't know, we do have a species of cactus that is native to Illinois. This is the eastern prickly pear, and this photo was lucky enough to capture it blooming, and it's really a striking plant in bloom. And this one is not restricted just to southern Illinois, but you can find it in about half of all Illinois counties. So definitely something to keep your eye out when you're out hiking. You can find the prickly pear in more sandy, drier areas. So sandy woodlands, sand prairies. This one I think was sent in from like a rocky bluff. So those are some places to look for this guy, but definitely keep your eyes out. It has that brilliant large yellow and orange bloom that you'll find in the summertime. All right, Austin. Thanks. Okay. Our next plant was another one that was seen hiking in the woods. And at first glance, it might look familiar and you might think, oh, that's a spiderwort, but I'm used to seeing spiderworts in sunny areas, not in the woods. But we actually do have a species of spiderwort that you can find in the woods, and it's called zigzag spiderwort. And this one actually has the broadest leaves of all of the different spiderworts in Illinois. So they can get up to 2 inches wide. And it has a little bit of a different growth habit than the other spiderworts. And I've seen this one reach heights of up to 4 and even 5 feet tall. So definitely grows a little bit different than the one like Ohio spiderwort that you might see out in a prairie. You might confuse it because you see it in the woods with dayflower, which is a non-native plant that's much shorter. It looks somewhat similar, but it has petals that are a little bit more blue, and then it only has 2 main petals, not 3 like we see in the spiderwort here. All right, Austin. Okay, perfect. This is our next plant, also found hiking in the woods, and this one has a couple different common names. We can call it self-heal or heal-all. That's H-E-A-L, self-heal or heal-all. And there's actually 2 different varieties of this plant in North America. One of them is native, and then one of them is introduced from Europe. And I believe, based on my research, that we have the introduced variety here in Illinois. Typically, it's found in disturbed areas and on trails. I've never seen it get to be a real issue in any of those areas. It seems to behave pretty well. Ways that you can identify it are that it has opposite leaves, and it has a square stem because it is in the mint family. So that's a really great clue that I always start with when I'm identifying a plant, is I always see if there's a square stem, because that really narrows down what you're looking at really quick. What you see pictured is the inflorescence or the flowering stalk of that plant, and when it's in bloom, it has these purple flowers arranged along that tall green inflorescence. In this picture, it wasn't blooming, but keep your eyes out when you're hiking to see if you find a short, it only gets like 12 inches tall, plant with this interesting looking inflorescence and purple flowers that are coming off of that. So that one is self-heal, and that is Prunella vulgaris is the Latin name for that one. Okay, next slide, Austin. Okay, so we got this picture in from Lake County, but we included it because this plant can be found in every county in Illinois. So it might be one that you are familiar with. And again, it has a couple different common names. I call it 3-seeded mercury, but it can also be called rhomboid mercury. And it is a native plant. It's an annual. Like I said, it's found in every county in Illinois. And you might not really pay too much attention to it because it doesn't produce any showy flowers. So it's just kind of something that looks green all year round, and it never really seems to flower. It is in the spurge family. So if you're familiar with plants in that family, usually they have a milky sap if you broke off a leaf. But unfortunately, this one has clear sap, so you can't really use that as an identification clue. But what I look for in this one is it has those toothed leaves, and the veins to me on the leaves really look like they're indented, much more so than in a lot of other species. And then this one here was growing in their yard. To eradicate it, it pulls really easily from the ground. And if you're able to remove it early in the summer before it sets seed, that can help prevent it from coming back in the future. Another recommendation is just to make sure you mulch in late spring, but in this picture we can see they did a great job mulching and it was still coming up. So these ones pull really easily out of the ground. I know I looked outside my window yesterday and saw a couple growing in my yard. So very, very common. You can find them all over Illinois. All right, next slide, Austin.
I believe this one's mine. This is my first one, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So this one came to us from our Extension Urban Tree ID website. And there was a little bit of debate on if this was an elm tree or a Japanese Zelkova. And so it kind of looks more like a elm tree. So I'm pretty confident that this is a species of elm. As far as what exact species, not exactly sure. It looks similar to a cultivar called Accolade, which was bred and created at the Morton Arboretum. It's an older tree that was created and established there, but it's not I'm very sure that it's not an American elm. So that would be the native variety of elm tree. American elms have a lot smaller leaves. So it is some kind of ulmus species, but in general, elm trees are, so this one is a non-native, but it's a very, or it was a very valuable and very desirable urban tree for parkways and along streets to provide shade and in the landscape. They get pretty large. They can get 40 feet or more. They're pretty quick growing trees, and they're hardy from northern Illinois to southern Illinois. So 4 to 9 is the hardiness zone. So the big problem with the native elm trees, the American elms, was that they were overplanted. They were such a nice tree. And so what happens when we don't have a diversity of varieties and species of a certain plant, we kind of open up to disease pressure, and that's where the American or the Dutch elm disease came in. So that was a fungal pathogen that caused major issues for American elms. So a good alternative is Zelkova, which is in the same family as the elm. So it's pretty closely related and has a lot of the same kind of qualities to it. But there are other kind of varieties or cultivars rather of elm that are more resistant to the Dutch elm. But American elm is pretty susceptible to it. So that's why we don't see too many. There are a few on the Southern Illinois campus here in Carbondale that are pretty good examples, but they're a little rare out on the ground. So that's this one, and we'll go ahead and move on to the next sample here. I believe this is one for Erin.
Yes, all right. So this next one came to us from Northeast Ohio, and they were asking if it's also native to our area. So based on this picture, I couldn't get down to the exact species of plant, but it looks like it's some type of gallium or a bedstraw. So if you're familiar with those plants, they have whorled leaves, which we can see here. So we have more than 2 leaves that are arranged around the stem together. And ways that you can tell different galliums apart is by the number of leaves that is in that whorl. So usually they have either 4 or 6. So in this case, we have 6 leaves, so that already helps us narrow down what species we're looking at. Unfortunately, from this picture, what I'd really need to see is a close-up of the stem and also the fruits, because in order to distinguish the species, you kind of need to look for different hairs, if there are hairs present on the stems and on the fruits. One species of gallium that you might be familiar with is called cleavers, and this one is kind of a weedier species that we find in more disturbed areas. And that one has these recurved or curved hairs along the stem. So if you pull it up and say, stick it to your hiking partner's clothes, it would stick on their clothes, okay? This one doesn't look like that species. It looks like one of the other native bedstraws. But still a good plant to find. And I believe, yes, that we do have, if not this exact species, we have many other galliums here in Illinois. All right, Austin, you can do next slide.
I believe this one is for me. And so this is an interesting one. And it's a type of wild quinine. It's also commonly known as feverfew. The scientific name is Parthenium integrifolium. And it is a Midwest native, and it occurs naturally in Illinois. It's a perennial, and it is used in this case, in ornamental landscaping, but it's also found in kind of more naturalized landscaping. And it is full sun, so it does best in full sun and in mesic conditions. So that means kind of moderately moist to dry conditions, where it's got some moisture, but it's not always totally saturated. maybe has some dry periods, so it can handle short periods of dry kind of conditions. And it's very easily grown in a wide range of soil qualities, so that makes it easy to grow. And wild quinine, or also known as feverfew, has a long bloom period from late spring up into mid-May, or I'm sorry, midsummer, and it has these kind of tight little clumps of white flowers. So it's got a very nice kind of visual effect there, kind of showy flowers. And the plant is known to attract a wide variety of bees, wasps, flies, beetles, and other insects. Use it as a habitat or food source. And so it is a pollinator plant. So that was a question here. Is this a plant for a pollinator garden? Yes, it is a plant that could be included in a full sun pollinator garden. And so I'm not sure exactly what insect that is. To me, it looks like a cicada killer wasp, but I was gonna leave that as an open-ended question if Erin has any kind of input there.
Some kind of wasp.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten any further than that.
Yeah. Yep, some kind of wasp. So, but obviously, yeah, it's attracted that pollinator right there. So that's wild quinine. And I think the next one is mine as well. Yep, okay, another pollinator here, taken around the St. Louis Science Center. And so this is one of probably the most popular. I would say this is one of the poster childs of kind of native plants and pollinator plants. Very well loved wildflower, and it's the purple coneflower. And it's also, the scientific name is Echinacea purpurea. So it's and this is probably, I would say, a cultivar, probably in an ornamental bed of purple coneflower, but that's the species. And let's see, so so Echinacea is also a really common name, and it's probably one that you would find in the herbal kind of supplement aisle. Echinacea is a very common herbal supplement, but this is a native perennial, and it's got a really wide distribution throughout most of the eastern part of the United States up to Canada, so very widespread, and into the Midwest, of course. That gets up to about 5 feet tall, and it has a terminal flower there. And so the petals on the Echinacea, or the purple coneflower, are almost neon pink to purple. So they're very vibrant. And that's one of the reasons that it's attractive to pollinators, because they kind of pick up on that wavelength of light. And same with the cone in the middle there. It's very almost on the spectrum of light where these insects are going to pick it up. So the ultraviolet kind of spectrum. And yeah, very vibrant, very noticeable, kind of very a noticeable bloom on these. And so they bloom continuously from July through September. And they do kind of create new buds in the axillary leaf buds throughout the summer. So they kind of continuously bloom. And it's very tolerant of a wide range of growing conditions, but it does prefer full sun. So you're going to get a lot more bloom and kind of a lot more of those characteristic kind of bright, showy flowers with full sun. And it's a great pollinator plant, of course, and it attracts all kinds of bees, butterflies, birds, and some, yeah, the eastern goldfinch feeds on the seeds. So, and it's a habitat kind of plant for a lot of pollinators, and a good resource plant. So a very good addition to a pollinator garden. And as far as other plants for a pollinator garden, I tend to lean more towards the natives, and we'll talk about a few of those in here, but generally things that are going to have these kind of showy flowers are going to be what I would predominantly feature or recommend for a pollinator garden. So that's going to be things with wide petals that pollinators can land on. So that things that they're naturally attracted to. So bee balm, echinacea, butterfly weed is a great example for butterflies, for monarchs. And there's just a ton of those kind of things, and things that bloom at different times as well. So lots of different kind of options there for those. But we'll talk about a few other kind of plants that are good for pollinator gardens here as we go along. And I believe the next one is for me as well. Okay, so there's a lot going on in this photo here. And what we're looking at is a very nice, colorful, ornamental arrangement with a very nice kind of variety of elements going on here. And so some of the plants are more on the perennial, kind of hardy perennial or tender perennial side. And this is in St. Louis, so it's kind of going to be in zone 6A probably. And so some of these are going to behave more as perennials in this kind of environment. And these are, we've got dianthus. Maybe I can get my pointer here. So these here are, I believe, dianthus barbatus, or a variety of dianthus, bearded dianthus, that is more cold hardy. And so we've got these, they're really kind of that striking pink color. We've got, what else is in here? Sweet William is in here, and that is, where's the Sweet William? Well, we'll come back to that one. I'm not quite sure where that one is, but we've got cup sage. This is mealy cup sage back here, or related to salvia, so kind of that blue color there. Gomphrena globosa is in here. You can kind of see that. There's some celosia in here, and gaillardia, some Dusty Miller, these are Johnny jump ups, or wild pansies, and some cleome back here. We've got yarrow here. And so all kinds of different, oh yeah, this is Sweet William. That's the common name for the bearded dianthus. It's also called Sweet William. And so we've got, the neat thing about this is we've just got a really neat combination of colors, textures, heights. So it's just a very dynamic kind of collection of things here. And I would probably call this a mixed full sun depart shade ornamental bed. And some of it is annual, some of it's more perennial, but it definitely is an eye catcher. So this is something that has a lot of color and probably will have seasonal bloom. So while some things are going to stop, kind of slow down in their flowering, we're going to see things like this gaillardia down here, and that's going to continue to bloom throughout the season. And I believe this is some kind of sedum, like a stone crop, so that may be blooming in the fall as well. So this is just a neat kind of arrangement here of just a pretty, for the space here, a pretty wide collection of plants and different colors and textures. Okay, this is another one that is on my list. And so these are an older plant that was an heirloom plant. So this was something that was handed down, and it was once a full plant, but now it looks like maybe it's kind of struggling a little bit. And so this is a kind of a very antique kind of landscape plant. And it's one that's been used in North America for probably 100 years or more, probably starting in Victorian times. This has been a very common landscape plant in North America. And so it was formerly known as Sedum spectabile, but it has now been reclassified by botanists to a different genus. So the new genus is Hylodolephium spectabile. And yeah, its common name is known as stonecrop, ice plant, something like that, probably more commonly stonecrop. And it is a succulent perennial plant and it's hardy throughout all of Illinois. So it usually will have a bright abundance of tight clumps of small pink flowers starting in late summer through fall. So we can kind of start to see that happening here. But it should be a lot more prolific near the end of summer. So it's one of these late kind of showy bloomers. And the recommendation for this plant is 6 or more hours of sun. So kind of morning to early afternoon sun, but then it does a little better if it doesn't sit out in the sun all day, if it's not exposed to really hot afternoon sun. So it's best with maybe some dappled shade. If there's a tree to the I guess to the north of it, or to the west of it to the west of it, that could give it a little bit more shade in the afternoon. So my parents had these on the east side of their house, and they got some afternoon sun, and they just grew like gangbusters, did very well. But they can be propagated by vegetative cuttings. So if you wanted to try to propagate this right now, you could take some vegetative cuttings off of the new succulent growth and start to propagate that indoors. Or you could try to split it up in September, late September, maybe the first week of October, and transplant it. You could try to propagate it that way. But other than that, as far as trying to split it up and transplant it in the spring, you could try that as well, but I think you'd have more success with transplanting it in later September or early October. So that is stonecrop. And I'm on a roll here, so I've got another one. I've got a couple more before Erin gets into some more kind of native plants. And so this is a tomato. This is a volunteer tomato plant. And of some kind, I don't know the variety, but it's probably from some kind of hybrid that was just an escape. So it could have gotten there many different ways. Something or someone dropped it there and just kind of made it to that location. But depending on the amount of light that it gets, it may or may not produce tomatoes, or if there's enough pollinators around, or if it's self-pollinating, it may produce tomatoes if it gets enough light. But as far as if they're going to be what the quality is, it's going to be kind of random because if it's from a hybrid, the F1 hybrids, kind of their offspring, produce kind of randomized quality of fruit. So they don't retain the selected qualities of the parent plant. But it could be good. It's just kind of the luck of the draw. It might be. But in any case, you could leave it there if you like how it looks, or you can just pull it. It's kind of up to, it's kind of up to your discretion. If you like, it's, and in some cases, tomatoes can have ornamental value. So it's more the discretion of the gardener on this one. Okay. And this is purslane. This is a very common, it's common purslane. Scientific name is Portulaca oleracea, and it is an annual warm season, and it's on the top list of most wanted weeds in my gardening, and for many gardeners. So it is closely related to a desirable plant, moss rose or Portulaca moss rose, but this one is very weedy and not very desirable. So it's a annual, warm season annual, and it can grow in just about any kind of conditions. It can grow in a little crack in the sidewalk, any kind of real estate that it can get into, it'll grow. And if left unpulled, if you don't remove it, it will create these small little seed pods in about 5 weeks. And they release thousands of tiny seeds, and these seeds, once they're in the soil, can survive for up to 5 years or more. So once the seed bank is in there, they're just going to keep coming back. And it can also be brought, and the seeds are so small that it easily is transported by animals, wind, water. So it's just going to be there. And it's kind of hard to avoid. But one nice thing is if the soil's wet, it does pull out pretty easy. However, if any part of the stem or a big chunk of the roots, it's got kind of a fibrous taproot, but if any part of that is left in the soil, is left behind, it'll just regrow in a day or two. And it grows really fast, grows very, very quickly. So it is kind of a gardener headache. It's a headache weed. And it's just one of those things that you live with. But it is considered in some areas of the world a nutritious food plant. Actually, it's got a lot of nutritional value, a lot of omega-3s. So it's used as chicken feed in some places as well. But I would just rather not have it around for this one. So that is purslane. Okay, I think this one is.
This is me.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So next up is purple passion flower. And this has easily become one of, I think, the craziest flowers that I think I've ever seen. Really stunning, about 3-inch diameter flower. And it is a native vining plant. And hopefully you can see the leaves in the bottom of the picture are 3-lobed, so kind of W-shaped. And the flowers are going to produce a large green fruit, and it has a seed-filled pulp inside that if you get it at the right time, can be eaten. I have experience of watching someone try to eat a not ripe one, and it was not very tasty. Another name for this guy is also the May pop, and that comes from like the popping sound that the fruit has when you break it open. And the other thing I wanted to point out on this flower is the 2 pollinators that we have on it. So the one on the right is a green metallic sweat bee, and then the teeny tiny dark colored one is something called a tumbling flower beetle. And it's really hard to tell in this picture, but if you're able to look at them closely, they have like a humpbacked shape, and then their abdomen forms a long point that extends beyond their wings. So it's a really easy beetle to identify, and it's a really common pollinator as well. So again, not the best picture, but when I was able to zoom up, I could tell those characteristics. So just something to be looking out for, because you may not recognize as many beetles that are visiting your flowers. Okay, Austin, next slide. Okay, next up we have a grass, and this one has many different common names. It goes by inland oats or sea oats or river oats, but the Latin name is Casmantium latifolium. And it's a very attractive grass that you can find in moist wooded areas along waterways. It has these characteristic flattened seed heads that hopefully you can see. Some of them are sideways. You can see how flattened they are. And it's become a more popular plant for landscaping because it turns a golden color in the fall. But this one, just be mindful that it can spread aggressively. It is native, but it can really take over an area. So just be conscious of that when deciding where to plant it, and make sure that you keep an eye on it so that you're keeping it in check and it doesn't just explode all over your yard. Okay, Austin. Okay, so this next one, they said, I saw this plant in a swampy area. Can I plant it in my yard, and where is the best spot to do so? So this is button bush, and it is a small shrub that can be found in swamps and wetlands, but it can do well planted in your landscape. So if you do have a lower area, somewhere with moist, well-drained soil, that would be a good spot to put it. It just won't do well in a really, really dry spot. So as long as it gets some consistent moisture, it doesn't have to be constantly damp of an area, then that would be a good spot to put it. Really, really striking white flowers that you can see in this picture here, and those are, I'd say, maybe two inches in size, and usually covered by a whole bunch of different pollinators. I know there are certain bird species, I believe as well, that will visit and eat the seeds. Okay, Austin? I think the next one's yours.
Yes, I think I've got a few of them here lined up. So this is our good old friend, the pear, kind of calorie pear, I believe, related to calorie. That's the genus of this type of tree, but it looks closely related to like a Cleveland pear, which would be a ornamental landscape variety. And so Cleveland and calorie pears have kind of gotten a bad rap over the last 10, 20 years, but up until the last 20 years or so, it was considered a highly valuable landscape tree. But today, a lot of concerns about invasiveness have come up. And so, and we're starting to address these now in a very serious way, trying to get the calorie pear under control, because it's become an economically and environmentally kind of challenging and somewhat harmful tree. So the problem is, the main problem, the reason it's invasive, is the viable seeds can be produced from other calorie pear cultivars when they're cross-pollinated. So originally, when these were bred as ornamental plants, they were bred to be sterile, but they've kind of broken out of their sterility and have started to cross-pollinate. And that's one of the main reasons that it's invasive, but it's got other kind of less than desirable qualities. So one of those is when it matures, it tends to have very kind of heavy branches, and it tends to cross branch a lot. So it's got kind of unsteady and kind of easy to break branches. So when it rains or there's a bit of a storm, a lot of times you have a lot of breakage. So they are not very structurally sound trees. So that's a problem for the ornamental landscape. And we have one at my office, and every couple, seems like every month or so, a large branch breaks out of it. So that's one of the drawbacks of those trees. And that is calorie pear, or that one's probably Cleveland. Now this one I think was on my list, correct? Yes, I think so.
Yep, go for it.
All right, so this is rattlesnake master. The scientific name is Eryngium yuccifolium. So you hear yuccifolium in there, and it is closely related and also kind of looks like a yucca plant. But this is a native to the Midwest, and it's a full sun perennial Midwest native. And it's also got a pretty wide distribution throughout the Midwest. It gets up to about 5 feet in height, and it blooms throughout the summer. So from early to late summer bloom, and it has these very characteristic sharp leaves, kind of spiky leaves, and a spiky globular seed head that kind of has that characteristic. It's very easy to pick out in the landscape. It's a very kind of characteristic pollinator, native pollinator, or native prairie plant. And so the spiky white balls, maybe, I'm not sure if that's why it's called rattlesnake master, but it's got these kind of noticeable spiky seed heads, and they're kind of whitish in color. And this is pretty undesirable to grazing animals. So if you're trying to keep deer maybe out of a garden, you might plant a row of these, and they'd probably try to avoid it. So kind of grazing animals, and they're not pleasant to walk through either. But it is attractive to a lot of different pollinators. So long-tongued bees, short-tongued bees, wasps, flies, butterflies, different moths and beetles are all attracted to rattlesnake master. And it does pretty well in dry conditions. So kind of a dry mesic area, full sun would do quite well. And kind of rocky or more clay soil, it does okay. So it's a pretty versatile pollinator plant. And it's got a very kind of unique look as well.
Hey, Austin.
Yes.
On the name Rattlesnake Master, I've heard a couple different things. One is that some early pioneers thought that the roots could be used as an antidote to rattlesnake bites, which is not the case, so don't try that. And also that the dried seed heads were used as rattles by Native Americans.
Okay.
So there's a couple different
I knew it
possible explanations.
I thought maybe it had to do with the seed head, but I think that I'd read that it maybe was used in kind of early medicine or early American medicinal kind of medicine there.
Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of common names came from. So
interesting. Thank you.
Yep.
And then what type of plant is this? So this is another one of those kind of, I would say, very popular pollinator plant. And when I think pollinators, my mind kind of goes to this plant. And this is commonly known as wild bergamot or bee balm. And the scientific name is Monarda fistulosa, but it's also commonly called Monarda as well, or Monarda bee balm. And it's one of these that's in the mint family. So it's got square stems. And as Erin mentioned, that's a way to identify and kind of narrow down at least what family of plant we're looking at. So this is in the mint family. And it's a very popular, showy perennial. And it's got a very wide distribution throughout the United States up into Canada. So it's got an upright growth habit, so it's very tall and kind of narrow growing, 5 feet tall, and it tends to grow in kind of clumps or massings. It does very well for massings. This is one of the best native perennials to use for a massing, I would think. It's got a very showy flower, and the flowers can be anywhere from whitish pink all the way to red. And they bloom from about June to September, or well, more maybe early July through September. So it's got a nice long blooming period for seasonal interest. It's kind of successional seasonal interest. And it is a bit more shade tolerant than some of the other native prairie plants. So it can handle maybe a bit more part shade, and maybe would even like it a little bit. So it is tolerant of poor soils and dry conditions. So it's a very versatile plant, can handle a pretty wide spectrum of different conditions. And it is also one of the reasons it does well with massings is it heavily reseeds itself. So maybe even a little bit more than people would like. So it's recommended to pull about half of the seed heads in fall to kind of reduce the seed drop a little bit. But it's attractive to bees, and a wide range of native bees utilize it. It's attractive to butterflies, hummingbirds, and I think birds also eat the seeds of this plant quite a bit. But hummingbirds like it because it has these tubular flowers. And that's something that hummingbirds like to go for with their long tongues. They really like kind of more tubular flowers to get the nectar out of there. So that is bee balm. It's one of those kind of greatest hits of pollinators. It's one that you'll find in any kind of probably pollinator seed packet mix. And I think this one is an Erin flower.
Yes. Okay, so this one is called rose gentian or rose pink, and it is a native wildflower found occasionally in the southern 2/3 of Illinois, and it is a biennial. And we can identify it because it has opposite branches with square stems that are also winged. So if a plant has a winged stem, it has like extra leafy appendages along it. So if you think of a winged elm and how there's extra bark along that, same type of concept with this stem. We can see these pink 5-petaled flowers, and it's going to bloom June through September. This is not one that I've ever actually seen in person, so I got to be on the lookout when I'm out hiking for this one. All right, Austin.
All right, this comes to us from Calhoun County, where we get Calhoun peaches from. But this is a interesting one. I wasn't too familiar with this, so it was kind of I'm sure I've seen it, but now, once you learn about something, you see it everywhere. But it's an interesting native plant, and it's native to the Midwest. It's a little less common in Illinois, but this is scientific name Ericima dracontium, and the common name is green dragon, or also dragon root. It's closely related to Jack in the pulpit, and it's an American native with a wide distribution to Canada. And so it gets about 3 feet tall. And so what's interesting about this is it looks like it's got these big multiple leaves, but this is actually one compound leaf. So it's actually only one leaf split up into leaflets. And it's a native that prefers shadier understory conditions. So heavy shade, this is heavy shade tolerant and kind of needs a little bit more steady, consistent soil moisture. So if it probably isn't going to survive out in a more sunny, dry location. And the green dragon has this kind of interesting, we can see here the fruit cluster, but before this happens, it's got what's called a spathe and spadix type of flower. And that's something we might see on a lily of the valley, or more we see this on more kind of tropical indoor plants, like Jack in the pulpit. That's not a tropical plant, but it's an example of the spathe and spadix kind of flower. So the flower, when it blooms, is not quite very noticeable. It's kind of greenish white, but this is, you might say, more of the noticeable part of this plant. And now that I think about it, I probably have seen it. So this part, it blooms in spring. It's considered kind of a spring bloomer. Pretty much goes dormant after it sets this fruit cluster, but then in fall and summer and late summer, fall, this matures to like a bright orange red fruit cluster. And it's very characteristic and noticeable. So that is the green dragon, which is something I'll be looking out for. All right. I believe this is in Erin.
Yes. Okay, so this next one has a whole bunch of different common names. I call it doll's eyes, but it's also known as white cohosh or white baneberry. The Latin is Actia pachypoda, and it's a perennial wildflower found in higher quality woods with compound leaves, and the leaflets are strongly toothed, and the toothing looks kind of feathered to me. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but you can kind of tell in the left picture that they're toothed leaflets. And then late spring to early summer, they're going to have white flowers in that cluster that you can see in the left photo. And then the flowers are going to be replaced by berries, as you see in the right. And in that picture, those berries aren't yet mature. So you can see that they're green in that photo, and they have a black spot on the end of them. And then when they're mature, they'll turn white. So that's where the name doll's eyes comes from, because you have white berries with a black spot on them. And then the stem that has the berries on it is also going to turn red. So very, very easy to identify when those fruits mature. And just a note that the berries are poisonous, so don't try collecting and eating those. All right, Austin, next slide. Okay, this is a wild senna. This picture was sent to us from Lake County, but this one we can find all throughout the state, all the way down in southern Illinois. And there's two different species of senna. There's a wild senna and a Maryland senna, and their ranges do overlap in Illinois, and they can be difficult to tell apart. Oops, sorry about that. There is a more technical way to distinguish them, but the less reliable but still works for our purposes way is just to look at how many flowers there are. So wild senna tends to produce flower clusters with an abundance of flowers, and that's what we see in this picture. And Maryland senna tends to have fewer flowers in the cluster. So that's why I'm leaning towards wild senna with this one. But it's a really great native prairie legume that's not very well known. And these plants can get quite large, so they can grow up to 6 feet tall. And they have these compound leaves that have a gland near the base of the leaf that produces nectar. And that nectar attracts ants that then supposedly protect the plant from other insects that would eat the foliage. And there are other leguminous plants that do this, a similar type of thing. Partridge pea does something similar as well, has those glands that produce nectar. So I think it's a really stunning plant, really quite large. I know Austin and I were talking, and he's seen it as incorporated into a landscape. So really, there's a lot of possibilities with this one, and I think it's a beautiful, beautiful plant. Okay, Austin, I think the next one's yours.
Yep. Yeah, I was just going to mention, I'd never seen this before until I was in Casey, Illinois, and on their main street, they've got some beautiful landscaping. So it's probably out there now if you ever find yourself in Casey. That's where that's where I first came upon this one. So interesting plant for sure. And this is another kind of interesting native plant. And this one I think is from more kind of northern Illinois. This is, and it took me a little bit. I had to try to key this one out, and turns out it's a native. The common name is white flower leaf cup, and the scientific name is Pollinia canadensis. So a lot of times if something's got canadensis in it, that's a clue that it might be native. And so it's in the aster family, and it is a native of Illinois, but it's fairly uncommon in natural areas. It is considered a herbaceous short-lived perennial, so it may only live a couple years, but it does reseed, so that's probably how it ended up where it is now. Somehow the seeds found their way to that little site there. It can get up to about 5 feet tall, and it looks like it's about there in this photo. And it's got these really neat, large, lobed green leaves. And it's got a small white flower with a yellow kind of cluster in the middle. And so a lot of times the petals are non-existent, and all you have are just the kind of that middle part of the flower. The yellow part. And the flowers bloom from about July through September. And so this plant prefers shadier conditions. It's more of an understory kind of plant that you would find in a kind of a woodland area. Likes kind of well-drained, moist soil. So you might find this in the same kind of environment that you might find a green dragon plant, very similar. But it does produce by reseeding, and when it's in kind of ideal conditions. So looks like that's maybe almost a compost pile there, possibly, and maybe that's where it was happy, you know, found its little happy environment there. And we got some pollinators here. I see some kind of bee, and I'm not sure if Erin, if you have any kind of input on the pollinators there. If not,
Nope.
but
Nothing to add.
okay, yeah, it's a rare one. This is kind of a rare native, but it's a neat one, because that's when you see that, it kind of looks like some kind of, the big leaves are one of these things. When you see that, it's like, oh no, is this some kind of terrible invasive kind of thing? But it's not in that case. And I believe this one is mine. If not, I'll take it anyway.
Go for it.
Okay, so this is a horse nettle, or Carolina horse nettle, and it's a Solanum. The scientific name is Solanum carolinense, and it is a perennial. It doesn't get very tall, but can get up to 3 feet tall, and it occurs throughout Illinois as a native in a wide variety of conditions. So it seems to be able to grow in full sun, or the picture on the left was in a very shady woodland environment up in Adams County in Siloam Springs. And it was one of the only things that was flowering out there. So it was kind of, that was in earlier July. So it can grow in the understory okay. And it has these kind of showy little white, pink, or white flowers in the summer, and they give way to small yellow fruit that persist on the dormant or dead part of the plant throughout the winter. And you might see those, and maybe some people might call them ground cherries or something, but they're not ground cherries. They're a highly toxic member of the Solanaceous family, and they're very toxic to humans and to humans' companion animals, such as dogs, and toxic to kids as well. So if you see one and you've got dogs or kids around, it's probably best to remove it. But if it's in kind of a more naturalized environment, it's kind of got its place there, because while it's toxic to humans, it is used by it's visited by bumblebees, but it's used as a food source for wild turkeys, pheasants, skunks eat it. Other rodents use it as food because they can process it. They've got the different kind of biological system that allows them to process it, but toxic to humans. So that is horse nettle. Probably not one you want in your ornamental pollinator garden. And I think this one is Erin.
Yep. So this next one is a tick trefoil, or a Desmodium species. And there are 18 different species of Desmodium in Illinois. But this one, luckily, is very easy to identify. So it might be kind of difficult to tell from the picture, but what we really need to look at are the leaves. And in this case, this Desmodium species has whorled leaves, which is kind of challenging, like I said, to tell from this picture, but I was able to zoom in. And there are only 2 species of Desmodiums in Illinois that have whorled leaves. And between those two, this one's leaves have a very prominent pointed tip that hopefully you can see in that left picture. It has a very pointed, we call it an acuminate tip. And that means that this is a pointed leaved tick trefoil. So that name makes sense too. So one of 18 species. It produces these pink flowers, and then it's going to produce those seeds that are my worst enemy that will stick to all of your clothes, and if you don't get them off and throw your clothes in the wash machine, they'll live in your wash machine for about 5 years and you'll never be able to get rid of them. So not the best to encounter when it's in seed, but really beautiful to see when it's in flower. Okay, Austin, next slide. Okay, so this next one comes to us from Morgan County, and this plant is called American germander. The Latin name is Teucrium canadense, and this plant is easily confused with another one called smooth hedge nettle. They look really similar, but you can tell the difference based on the flowers. So in this one, it has these white to purple flowers, and they're missing an upper petal. It's kind of difficult to tell from this specific picture, but if you saw it in person, usually there's a another top banner or petal that you would find in the smooth hedge nettle, but it's missing in this one. So this is the American germander. It is in the mint family, so it has a square stem. You know, that's my favorite characteristic to look for. Usually it's found in moist areas. And it also has opposite leaves with a toothed margin. Okay, Austin. And I think we've got about 4 more plants, and then we'll take some questions just because I'm looking at our time here. So another plant from Morgan County, at first glance, if you are familiar with anything in the nettle family, hopefully you can see that this plant belongs to that family. And it's not stinging nettle, but this one is actually something called false nettle. So the plant has opposite leaves with toothed margins, and we can see those flower clusters that are produced in the axils of the leaves or coming out from where the leaves also join the stem. And we don't see any stinging hairs along the stem, so that's why I'm going with false nettle for this one. There's another species in the nettle family that also doesn't have stinging hairs called clearweed, but it's a lot shorter and it has a translucent stem. And with this plant, the flowers, well, the plants are dioecious, so there's male and female flowers on separate plants, and the flowers are actually wind pollinated. Okay, Austin, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, this one, also from Morgan County, is white snakeroot, and this is a really common native woodland edge wildflower. It has opposite leaves with toothed edges, and these clusters of small white flowers that are going to attract a whole bunch of different pollinators, from bees and wasps to butterflies and moths. It is a late summer to early fall bloomer. And the way that I actually identify this plant is not by any of those characteristics I just listed, but I was taught that there is a leaf miner insect whose larvae actually feed on the leaf tissue, and they leave a white trail behind them. So Austin, I'm not sure if you can point out with your mouse, on the rightmost leaf, kind of in the center, you can see a white kind of zigzag right there, yeah. That white marking, I have found on nearly every snakeroot plant that I have ever seen. So that's kind of what I look for, is I look on the leaves. If I think I'm looking at snakeroot, I look for that trail, and then I know that that's the plant I'm looking at. A few things to note with this are the leaves of this plant are bitter and toxic, so it's often avoided by grazing mammals. But if it is in a pasture that's overgrazed and cattle graze it, it can be fatal. And it can also lead to something called milk sickness if the toxins pass through the milk of the dairy cattle and get to humans. So definitely, if you have it in an area that's being grazed, I would treat it to remove it so that you don't have to worry about any of the toxic properties of that plant. Okay, Austin, I think you've got the next one. Are you there, Austin? You might be muted.
I was talking to myself.
There you go.
So I was just saying that these next few slides are kind of some curiosities or troubleshooting kind of things. And this is a wildflower patch. And the question is, what kind of grass is taken over here? And it looks pretty much to be overrun by yellow foxtail. And yellow foxtail is a native grass, but it is an aggressive, weedy, what we would call kind of a weedy grass, a native grass. And it's just prolifically reseeds itself on these big kind of catkin flowering tails. There you go. And yeah, once it's in the seed bank, it's very difficult to control. So, and we also talked about how it might have even been in the pollinator seed mix that this was used to create. And so, when you're looking at a pollinator mix, you really need to make sure, where it's coming from and know the producer and even be able to communicate with them and make sure that it doesn't have the yellow foxtail in it. You don't really, yellow foxtail doesn't need any help reproducing or propagating. It's doing fine on its own. So as far as trying to get it under control, my suggestion is usually at this point, you kind of have to restart. So it's a bit of a bummer, but yeah, the best thing is going to be probably to just mow it down and probably in late September, early October. You can start mowing it down now, but you're still going to have that seed pressure in there from the yellow foxtail because it's already going to seed. So you could try to kill it back in some way, but in any case, mow it down as low as you can and shallow till in late September, early October, or into October, and then reseed with a pollinator mix without yellow foxtail in it in late October to maybe the first week in November. Cover it with straw and then just leave it alone until spring. And then you can try to start to get some control of that yellow foxtail. Now, the thing is, once it's established, once we get more desirable kind of forbs and native kind of things in there, or pollinator plants, in any case, established over the next year, maybe a year or two from now, you can apply a pre-emergent herbicide in the spring, early spring, before that yellow foxtail and other kind of pernicious grasses and nuisance kind of grasses can germinate. So what you're trying to do at that point is just get some control over the seed bank. You can't do that though next year because you're still gonna have those desirable seeds, and pre-emergent is going to suppress any kind of seed growth. And there are some options for organic pre-emergent herbicide, but a lot of times it's a granular kind of thing that you apply as soon as probably first couple days after your last hard freeze, or even before that, really. But that's what I would recommend for that. Just kind of have to start over on that, unfortunately. So let's move on to the next slide here. Now this one, Erin, do you have some information on this one?
I do. So this was really interesting, that lightning had struck this cottonwood, and you can see that it has turned this brilliant bright red. So Austin and I were stumped by this, so we reached out to Chris Evans, who's the extension forester, and he also had not seen this before and wasn't quite sure what was going on, but he passed on his speculations, so I'll pass those on to you. So he was thinking that the color might be due to a pathogen that rapidly colonized the wood after the lightning struck it. And then the red color is coming through because that pathogen's been exposed to air. So he said in other species, there's a red stain fungus in box elders that you can see. And sometimes after you cut a tulip tree down, you can see a blue stain on it. So that's as close as we got to an answer on this one, but really interesting, not anything we had seen before. So that was really, really something to see. I'm curious what's going on there too, but that's as close as we got on that one.
Yeah, I'll take that explanation. That sounds good to me. So here is our contact info for Erin and I, and thank you, Erin, for sharing your expertise with us today. And let's see if there are some questions.
Okay, there were a couple questions. First off, just in case anyone missed it, at the beginning, someone had asked what the botanical name for self-heal was, and I hope I don't butcher it, but it was Prunella vulgaris.
You got
Is that
it.
correct?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So that one, if anyone missed that. Okay, so the first question we had was, what caused the significant eating on the elm tree leaf?
Looked like, probably some kind of caterpillar or beetle damage. I'm not really sure exactly. If they like to email me that question, I could kind of look at it, but I don't know for sure. Erin, do you have any?
Nope. I don't have any.
It could be a caterpillar. But I don't know right offhand what it might be. But some kind of insect is eating it. I just don't know what. But I could look into it and see what it could be. But yeah, if they want to email me, I could get back to them.
Okay. And then the next question we had was when we were talking about the purple coneflower, they were asking the easiest way to tell the difference between the purple coneflower and the pale purple coneflower, E. purpurea and E. pallida.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Austin, you want?
Oh, well, the only really noticeable characteristic is, for me, the way I tell them apart is the petals are a lot more kind of fine and narrow. They're not quite as short and full. And I guess maybe they're a little more pale pink or purple. But Erin, do you have any more identifying characteristics?
So the one that I've used is the different color of pollen. So the pale purple, the pale is going to have white pollen, and the purple is going to have yellow pollen. So if you catch them when they're flowering, that's what I've used to tell them apart. And also, I believe that the pale is going to bloom earlier than the purple. So anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks earlier. But also, yeah, I mean, I look at the width of the petals, but they can always hybridize, so they can't always use that as the easiest way to tell them apart. But from what I've seen, I've used the white and the yellow pollen as the way to tell them apart.
Okay, yeah, ideally, if it's the perfect natural lineage, yeah, you'd look for kind of the more slender, and I guess they droop a little bit more too, maybe, but that's in an ideal condition because they do tend to hybridize and cross-pollinate. So, but those are the main ways to identify that one or differentiate.
Okay. And those are the only questions we had. Just for a few people that did ask questions regarding plants that were not pictured in this program, if you could please email us about those, because we will answer the questions you have and discuss whatever you need. I'm getting ready to send out an evaluation, if you would fill that out, and a link to our YouTube page where this will be posted in about 5 to 7 days. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.